Hello, you guys, and welcome back to Ambitious. Today, we are diving into a topic that I actually get asked about quite often. And I actually went to an event a couple weeks ago, and someone came up to me and they said, Kate, I know that there's lots you can teach me about like marketing, sales, all of the things. But she was like, the question I'm really dying to ask you is like, you work with your sister, you work with friends, you delegate to friends outside the team, inside the team, you work with your mom. What is that like? Like, what does that experience actually look like? And I was just shocked by how many people were truly curious and had questions about what it was like to work with family. So, after getting questions at this event, and then I also get these questions with our clients of like, I'm thinking about hiring my sister, I'm thinking about hiring my brother, my mom, or my dad, or my uncle. And people saying like, is this okay? Like, what do I do with this desire to bring on somebody that potentially is a family or friend? Is that a no-no in business? And I would say personally, in my experience, I've always heard that you should never hire friends or family. Like, it's always kind of considered to be like a don't do that. That is not a good practice. But as someone who now has been working with family and friends for an extended period of time of a couple of years, I can tell you I've learned a lot, and I think that there's pros and there's cons. So today we're diving into that. If you are someone who's maybe thinking about bringing on a partner, spouse, friend, family member into your business, then I want to give you the real and honest truth of what that looks like, things that I think have actually worked really well about this arrangement and things you want to consider, but also things that you might want to keep your eye on as to areas to pay attention to, just to make sure that, in this arrangement, because there are so many different factors in it, that you kind of are having your eye on a couple of things that most likely are going to come up as part of it as well. So with this being said, let's get into it. One of the things that I will say, the pros, let's get into the pros first. So one thing I will say about the pros is that when you work with family, you know their personality, right? Like when you hire somebody who isn't family into the team, you're kind of guessing as to what this personality is going to be like and how they're going to intertwine with the rest of the team. If you are hiring a sister, partner, etc., you know all of the things that make them tick, you know all of the things about their personality. And with this, I actually think, you get a better understanding on the front facing of them joining of what their skills are, what their work ethic is like all that going in. Whereas obviously with somebody else, we have the interview, we do our best to kind of do our due diligence. But I would say, generally speaking, let's be honest, all of us are like on our best behavior anytime we're in an interview for a job. So when you're bringing on family, I feel like you have a really good, honest understanding of what people are actually like, what motivates them, what they care about, and just like all of the personality traits of that person. Now, the other thing that I will also say that I think has been a very big win from having both friends and family within our business is that they are often extremely flexible in comparison to other people on the team, just because of the fact of their relationship with you, right? So I find that not that our team members who are not family or friends do not completely kick ass at all the things that they do, but I do think that they basically, in being friends or family, are people who are just always willing to go like above and beyond, and sometimes even outside of like the scope of what their scope of work is, what they were assigned to do, just because again, the relationship is there. They are not someone who's seeing this necessarily as a clock in, clock out, these are my 5 hours, and like I'm done my job, I'm done for the day. When they are emotionally invested in you and your relationship, it may also see that correlate to the work that they do within your business and also the way that they show up. Many times with my sister, my mom, like they are working at hours that are definitely not in their typical hour scope. And that's not because they're being asked to, but just because they're so willing to go above and beyond because they're emotionally invested into this vision and into what we're building because they are friends and family. And so I will say a big pro in having that on the team is that you have so many people who are so emotionally and mentally invested into this. And as a result are typically willing to be a little bit more flexible, I would say, than you would traditionally even expect of anyone who would have a job with you of like set hours. Now, I also think that, for me, what I've seen within our family is I think kind of connected to that as well. We see that when not just myself, but when the business wins, we all win. And so I think for a lot of contractors or potentially employees, there's kind of this idea of sometimes the vision can feel like that certain person's vision. So for example, you may hire someone and you're kind of like, well, how do I get them invested into kind of realizing it's us, not me? And I think obviously, yes, I'm the face of our brand and I'm the face of our business, but my family and friends recognize that like when I win, when the business wins, you win. When we make more, we can help you make more. There's this domino effect. And so I think as a result, what really impacts one family member impacts the family in general. Like what impacts you impacts your friends. So I think for me, as working with family, what I've realized is like they are so emotionally invested because they recognize that like what impacts myself and my business kind of thing really does domino into impacting their lives significantly. Like I would say, as a byproduct of having my family in our business, they've been able to have certain opportunities and certain, I would say a different lifestyle than they may traditionally have with another job that they would do. And again, I think that's because we're in it together and they recognize when one of us wins, all of us win. And I think generally speaking, that should be the motto in any business, regardless of family or friends. But I think that because again of that emotional connection and that relationship, it's even deeper, it's even more enforced. The other thing that I actually really appreciate, which it can have its pros and cons, I guess. But the one thing that I would also say I really do appreciate with working with family is like, you are never going to get such honest feedback. I will tell you the communication is so transparent, direct, and honest. If you've ever thought about potentially even someone you've worked with and you're like, oh, I wish I could just tell Stacy what I freaking feel right now, but you can't because you have to kind of go through those like, proper communication and verbiage hoops to not actually be able to say like, hey, like, I think this is an awful idea. To me, you can't say that in a traditional structure. So I find that by working with family, you're going to get the real and honest communication. You don't have that extra filter because that's not typically how you communicate. Now, again, that has its pros and cons. But to me, the reason that I appreciate this so much is I don't ever feel like people are saying things to be agreeable. They're just saying things to basically like, yes, don't rock the boat, don't create resistance. I know for a fact that when I ask my friends on the team, when I ask my family on the team, and again, this applies to our entire team, I do think, but I think even more so, these things are just accentuated because someone is a family or friend. I know that the communication is going to be very direct and it's going to be very honest and it's going to be very transparent. And I appreciate that because I actually will say, I think because of that communication, it has allowed us to make decisions faster. It has allowed us to execute faster. It has allowed there not to be this extra fluff in between. I'm just like, give it to me straight. Is this a good or a bad idea? Tell me honestly, like you love it or you hate it. Give me the 101 of it. And I think whereas someone else might think they have to add a filter before communicating, I think as family, you kind of just, that filter is gone, to be honest with you. And you're just super honest. And I actually do think that that's been such an asset in our business because it's helped us to make decisions so quickly. It's helped me to get a really good pulse check of ideas and plans and execution quickly. And it allows us to, again, obviously scale quickly as a result. The other thing I will also say is I think that because, again, going back to the impact of what happens with my business impacts the family. And for me, kind of seeing this as like an us and a we, I will say because people know me personally, they know my personal like goals, desires, struggles, resistance areas, my individual personality and skill sets. I think that the thing that I will say is that they are so deeply emotionally invested into my vision. For example, my mom works within the business and for her, while yes, okay, she does back-end management, she's very much the Kris Jenner, if you will, of our team. She is somebody that is so invested in seeing me succeed. Yes, because like any team member, she should be invested in the vision. But there's also this added layer of the fact that she's my mom and I'm her daughter and that she wants me to succeed and she wants me to have financial success and she wants me to have family success. And there's added layers, I would say, of the depth of the vision is not just the vision of the business, but the vision of what she knows is going to be true for my life. And the same thing for my sister who works with us, right? Like for me, it's not just about, compensate her for what she's doing. It's about the fact of like, how can I help make sure that people grow basically within their goal, not just for the business, but also for their own individual goals as well. So I do think that having friends or family in the business can sometimes, not always, but can sometimes mean that people are more emotionally invested in the vision of the business and where it's going and deeper into each other's visions as well. I also do think that with friends or family, it might not be something that people would assume, but there's actually quite a bit more stability. And what I mean by that is I don't ever really worry about my mom leaving the business tomorrow and like leaving me shorthanded. I never really worry about yeah, just a quick reaction from family or friends, because again, there's a prior relationship there. And I think for me, I think having friends and family in the business has allowed this aspect of like, I know they're going to be there. I know they've got my back. I know that if stuff gets tough and we experience resistance, like they're going to be there. And I will say, like, just overall, I do think that having friends and family in the business adds this level of comfort or home almost in a way to the business. It's hard to explain, but I just think this aspect of kind of like you feel going home, to your parents' house after you moved out and, eating the food they make you and all of that. Like you feel like you're home. You feel like stability when you go back. And so I kind of feel like that within my business, to be honest, because I have friends and family in it. Like I feel this, underlying layer of stability. And again, like I don't only work with friends and family, and I still feel that all the other people who are not friends and family are extremely stable within our business. It's not that they're not stable. I just think that there's this added, again, depth of that feeling because somebody is friends or family. I do also think that, probably one of the biggest assets, in my opinion, of having friends and family in the business is they are such a support system for me in a way that I never really even ever anticipated when bringing them into the business. I think, for me, working with sister, friend, mom, they're just such cheerleaders of me and also of the business. Like I think that for them, even when we've had conversations about a while ago, we would have conversations about like initial compensation and growth and things like that. And, for me, I never felt this pressure of, oh, well, like this is because it's what I want. Like they very much always would have this underlying tone of do what you need to do for the business. We support you regardless. So if there was a scenario where it's give the compensation to person A who's family or friends versus person B who's a new hire, there's no bad blood there. If you do what's best for the business, like if you feel the business needs this, go do that. If you feel that that's the right next step, go take that step. Like they're so, I would say, supportive of just recognizing that like I need to do what I need to do for the business. And I will also say that I think most times we really reiterate that while we are family or while we are friends, we also recognize that like the business is its own separate entity. Like I always vocalize this and I rinse and repeat it, even to our team, because a lot of the people who've been on our team for a long time I'm very close with. And so I will often talk about like, while, I see you as family, as a friend, or you literally are my family as my family, the business is its own entity. The business is like its own self-sustaining child that needs to be fed and nurtured and loved and taken care of. And I can't let our relationship get in the way of that. So while there are things you have to consider, absolutely, by having friends and family in the business, the thing that I know is that you need to remember your business it cannot be clouded by the personal relationships and the personal dynamics you've got going on, because your business is its own entity. And again, it's the whole thing of like, it's not personal, it's business. I actually very much do believe in that motto, because while I have these personal relationships and they are absolutely incredible, everyone has this clear understanding and they very much respect that the business needs to do what it needs to do. And that this is not Kate, your sister, saying this to you as a decision. This is not Kate, your daughter, saying this to you as a decision. This is Kate, the business owner, the CEO, the manager, whatever you want to call it, in that conversation, who's making a decision that's best for the business. And I think by having those really clear understandings of communication, again, that really, as we're going back to like the honest and the transparent and the direct communication, by having that, I think that everyone's on the same page and we all have very clear expectations of what it's going to look like when we're making these tough decisions. I will say as well, I think for me, bringing my family originally into the business was not really like this created plan. Like I was never like in this idea of, oh, I'm going to bring my entire family into my business. It was never something that I had originally had as like an idea, to be totally honest with you. And it kind of just fell into place. Like originally my mom had worked in financials. And so then when I needed financial help, because the cash flow of the business and the payments and all these things were just getting more and more intense, I was like, she was someone who already was in a job that she'd been doing for a while within the finance industry. But I needed that help. And I was like, hey, what do you think about basically helping me with the financials? And then my sister coming into the business, I actually remember the way that she came in was I was writing a ton of Instagram posts. I was batching Instagram content. And I remember I was at my mom's house doing what I consider to call deep work, which is like focus work. And I was so tired and exhausted. If you guys know me, you know I'm not a writer. I'm somebody who's not good at writing. And I remember that I literally was sitting there and my sister was like, give me your computer and tell me what you're trying to say. And I remember so quickly after handing her the laptop, I got the caption back and I was like, oh my God, like this is incredible. This is amazing. And so I remember saying, hey, what would you think if I like basically gave you a little part-time gig here and gave you some stuff to assist me with the business? And she was like, okay. So she at the time didn't have like training in any of these things, but I basically was like, hey, like this is something I think you have a skill at and it's something I need help with. So what if we basically pair those two things together? And, you know, I will say like working with family was not part of the plan, but it kind of got worked into becoming part of the plan because the skill sets fit the needs that the business had at that time. And so, yeah, I would say as a result, it kind of all fell into place. And I guess the reason I mention this is because I think in that moment, what I've realized, whether someone working for me or not, if it's, you know, a partner, a friend, whoever, like if it doesn't really matter, if I can bring in people into the business or if I can make sure that my business affects the people that I love, what I've realized is that it just has been so much more fulfilling because it's no longer, and it hasn't been for a while, the Kate show. Like this is not, well, again, I'm the face of the brand and I'm the face of the business. Yes, we're not doing this for me and my own personal gain so I can drive a Maserati, right? Like we're doing this to basically change the status of wealth for my current family, my family to come one day when I'm a mom, hopefully. And so for me, it's the domino effect. And I think having family either internally in the business or having them somehow connected to assistance with the business really has created this mindset of the fact that this is not a me show. This is not me building my dream. It's basically building an empire. It's having this domino effect on your family and the family to come after that and so on and so forth. And so while it is incredible that obviously this business has impacted me, I think it's also looking at the impact that it can have on my sister and her family or my mom and the rest of her retirement, like thinking about basically the domino effect it has on people around you. So I think the biggest takeaway that I've had is just having that aha moment of like, this is not me building my dream. It's basically me building an empire for people around me. And I just think it's made the business that much more fulfilling in my opinion. Now listen, while there are all of the amazing parts of working with family and friends, there's also some things that I will tell you are difficult and that are resistance factors. When people say don't work with family, I think the reason that conversation comes up is because I don't think that there's a rule book to it. And the reason I don't think there's a rule book to it is because every family is different. Your dynamics are different. Your relationships are different. Your communication is different. And as I say this too, like I want to also recognize this is my family. This is the way that we communicate, the way that we operate. I'm not saying that this will necessarily be the same for you. You may be saying to yourself, well, if you only knew my mom and if you only knew my sister or brother, I appreciate that. I know that like dynamics are different. So I'm not saying that what I'm saying today necessarily means it will be identical for you, but I want to show you that it can be great and it can work. It can definitely work. And you can also have areas that you definitely want to be aware of. So let's get into those. So to me, first one I will say is that I think one of the downsides, in my opinion, is that working with family or friends, indirectly, it's not intentional, but indirectly, you're going to realize your entire relationship becomes about business. Like you can be at like a Christmas dinner and find yourself talking about, oh, did you get that email sent out? Right. Or you're going for brunch and you'll talk about, hey, by the way, like that marketing campaign, when's the deadline on that again? You find that you're having conversations about business basically 24/7. And that's because you're in it together. It's like this shared experience that you guys had together. So I think to me, while it's great again that you can have that communication at all hours and that can be a pro, it can also be a con because very quickly you'll realize like your business will bleed into your relationship. And then your relationship, if you're not careful, can only become about business. And I have found it at times difficult to turn on and off because it is the thing that we share the most common interest in at that point because we're both so deep into it. I also think with having more honest and open communication, while it is good from a feedback standpoint, the downside to it is, at least in my opinion, I have found it very difficult because I love them, friends or family, because I really care about them, to have the tough conversations. Say, for example, someone's performance. You wanted to have a conversation about, like, hey, I feel like I'm not seeing exactly what it is that I want to see when it comes to performance lately. To me, I have found it very difficult to be like, let's just say hypothetically, like, hey, family, hey, friend, like, I know we're doing brunch tomorrow, but also I'm not feeling super satisfied lately with basically the performance side of things. It's a very uncomfortable conversation if that's your partner, your mom, your sister, your brother, your best friend. To me, it's so difficult. I find it so, so difficult because the relationship has so much depth to it to be able to then say, hey, I'm not happy with performance. So I do think having those conversations can be difficult. And as a result, I think of the domino of that, sometimes because those conversations are difficult, you'll find that you're having those conversations less, which is not a good thing in business, because my big motto is like, if you see it, mention it, talk about it, because you don't want this underlying resentment. And I do think with working with family, you can sometimes have that because you're needing to say things, but you're not actually saying them. And it does cause resistance, I would say, in the relationship, because you're not saying the things you need to be saying for the job side of things. I also do think that the thing I hear of many people, like, clients that I work with, some of my friends who also work with their family, something that I do think I've always felt is kind of, again, back to the empire example. While that's beautiful and it's incredible, something I also see connected to that is, I'm not going to lie, I feel a lot of responsibility. And this is not from my family. It's not from my friends. My friends have always, and my family has always said, like, do what you need to do for the business. And if for whatever reason it came to a point that we needed to be impacted by that, like, we understand that. But I will say, I have often felt a lot of pressure to not even grow the business for me, but grow the business for them, because like their livelihood is connected to this business. And like we were talking about the domino effect of the success of the business, that also happens on the opposite end, which is that if there's a negative aspect to the business, or if the business doesn't succeed for whatever reason, that also has an impact and a domino on them in a negative way. And so I definitely will say, I think with the empire kind of mindset, I have struggled because I do feel this like very deep responsibility to win, not just for myself, but also for my family. So while it is something that I think is a motivator in a good way for me, like it really keeps me pushing and growing, I also have definitely at times felt it, if I'm going to be honest, fairly overwhelming, because I think about if something doesn't go right, or if I take a risk, or if I kind of put it all on the line, if you will. Yeah, I'm willing to risk that, but am I willing to risk it for my family, kind of thing? And I think it has always been like an extra filter of how I've looked at things. Now, another thing that I will say has been a struggle is boundaries, because I think with kind of talking about the fact that we're talking about business all the time, even something that my family and I are openly talking about is the fact that, for example, if you're going to communicate with your boss at work, technically speaking, and not that would say that I ever call myself this, but technically in thinking about I have them working with me, I am indirectly, whether we call it that or not, their boss. And so I think something that's been tricky is the fact that obviously we want this honest, open, transparent communication, which we love and has been very effective for the business. But also what I have found is that it's tricky because in the communication, being open and transparent communication all the time, you kind of go intertwined between personal and business language. And what I mean by that is, like, if you were in a conversation with your boss, you could only be so direct before you're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. You would never say that to a boss. And that's because when someone in my family or friends is being super direct with me in communication, that's because they're kind of coming through as their personal side, not them professionally. And then to have that kind of intertwine into a professional conversation, it gets a little bit complicated. So to me, I think framing conversations is important. And I also think, again, over communication. I can't stress it enough. You have to over communicate and say, listen, this is how in these settings we need to be talking about this. And if we're outside these settings, yes. For example, for me, I can be very, very candid with my mom, for example, on a one-on-one call. And we can have super honest and open communication about things. And again, still very direct. Sometimes it can ruffle feathers between us, but I will say overall, it is something that really helps the business significantly. But for example, something that I have basically vocalized is like in a team setting, because of the respect of the structure, we have to be very conscious of the fact that you need to communicate in a group format the way any other team member would, because you also have to remember that when a team member who's non-family or friends sees family and friends on the team communicating totally differently, you have to realize whether you're intentionally doing this or not, it is setting an expectation of communication with those team members that are non-family and friends. So you have to be conscious of, hey, we've got non-family friends on the team. And so as a result, how we communicate is important because it's setting a standard for other people's communication with us. So just something you want to note if you are someone who's thinking about working with friends or family. So I think because the boundaries get a little bit blurred in working with family, you want to be clear about how you want to communicate. Are there different areas where you can communicate a little bit more formally, less formally? Also, I would say, are there times, and I talk about this a lot with team in general, are there times where you're looking to just have a sounding board as like your mom or your sister or like a teammate sounding board? Or are there times where your frame going in is like, no, I'm telling you this. I'm not looking to have a conversation about it kind of thing. It's not a negotiation. So because there's a lot of discussion and ideas being shared and it's beautiful, there's also times where you may not want to have it as a discussion and you have to make sure that you vocalize that because otherwise it becomes this blurred gray mess of kind of like, I'm not really sure what the dynamic is here, what the expectation is of the communication. So as a result, what I've seen is sometimes friends or family, because of their relationship with you and because they're kind of being like no filter sometimes, can feel super confident to communicate in a way that isn't necessarily always professional. And so as a result, you just want to be conscious of that and have conversations around that, because if it's not communicated or there's not an expectation set with it, it can kind of, drip out into the rest of the team, in my opinion. So the big thing to me is, while I like honest and transparent communication, being too blunt can sometimes be actually a bottleneck or a resistance in the business. So you just something you want to keep in mind of. I also will say, because of the investment in the relationship, the downside is that if you have to realize, if you hire family or friends, you guys need to have a conversation about what that looks like if it doesn't work. Because I was just communicating with my sister the other day and I said, listen, like, I could not work with all of our friends or all of our family. Just because someone is my family or friends does not mean that they would necessarily be someone I would actually want to work with. And that is because I don't, number one, think that necessarily every single person has skill sets that make sense in the business. So I think when someone asks me, like, hey, should I hire friends and family? I'm like, well, do they have a skill set that the business needs? Because if they don't, then that's kind of something we want to be conscious of. But I would also say you have to be willing and ready that if you hire somebody who you're bringing into the business, who is family or friends, who doesn't end up working out, how are you going to handle that? Like, how are you going to navigate that conversation? Have that before they come into the business, not when it happens. Because I can tell you, I have talked to business owners and strategized with them like, oh my God, what do I do? This person is like so close to me, but they're not performing. Or this person is, so close to me as a friend or family, but like they cannot stay in the team. It's not working out, but they feel so uncomfortable because they didn't have this conversation. They didn't set this as a precedent before the relationship started. So now it's uncomfortable. To me, the way that I approach this is I always have communicated to people that I want to focus on our relationship, number one, over the business. That is more important to me. So if I do think that our relationship will be compromised by something that we're doing, I would rather hire somebody else and kind of like part ways and maintain our relationship than continue with the business. Because the reality is, one of the biggest lessons I actually learned from my coach was the idea that, like, regardless of who people are, everybody is replaceable. And that's not to say that people are not massive value adds to your team. What I mean saying that is the fact that skill sets are not something you don't ever want to have this structure in a team where this one person is so valuable that they just simply cannot go because the whole thing would crash. That actually is a very big risk to your business. So to me, in knowing that and kind of adopting that principle in my business very early on, what I basically express to people is like, listen, like, I love having you doing this job. I love our relationship. I love all of that. If I need to, or if we feel that there's kind of like some friction here and we're not able to communicate the way we need to, and there's not a mutual respect there, and some of those core factors, or it just simply is not working out because they are not holding up their end of the bargain, or whatever the reason is, you need to set the expectation on the front end before they even join the business that if this is not working out, here's how this is going to go down. Here's what we're going to do. And you both need to be mutually like agreeing on like, this sounds good to us, not like you as a CEO being like, oh, this is what we're going to do. You guys both need to be on the same page. So like, we agree, this is what we're going to do. And that's just something that I think is important. Setting expectations on the front end is a big philosophy of mine, because I do think that this allows you to go back to, remember when we had this conversation of like situations just like this? I think that we've hit that moment. And I think it would be best for us to part ways. Now, am I going to say that always works out beautifully? No. There are some times where one party or another will have a bad taste in their mouth and you may still not be able to maintain the relationship. But I think doing your best to set that expectation is the best thing that you can do to give yourself at least the cards are in your favor kind of thing in order to set the deck that if that situation happens, you've got everything in line. The other thing that I will also say is I do think that sometimes when you hire family or friends and there is that blurred line, you have to be careful, because if you are a little bit lenient with them because you care about them and you're like, okay, like these are the standards of the business, but of course, if you need me or if something happens, let me know kind of thing. Like you're always trying to, their family, their friends, you're trying to do your best to support them. The other side of the equation you have to be aware of, while that's beautiful that there's flexibility as a pro, the other thing that you want to be aware of is that flexibility may also be a little bit too lenient on their side. And what I mean by that is sometimes I do think because somebody is friends or family that if you're not careful, and again, this depends on the person, if you're not careful, they may see your flexibility, your ability to kind of be supportive regardless of the scenario. You may sometimes see that as them taking also advantage of you. So you also have to set very clear expectations, in my opinion, of like, what is the role? And again, business is separate than personal. What is the role? What needs to be done? And are those tasks being completed? Because if they're not, then you can sometimes find that people kind of like use the relationship factor to, I guess I would say, test the boundaries of the role of what they've been hired for. Are they taking extra time off? Are they somebody who maybe is letting deadlines slip because they're like, oh, so-and-so will understand, right? Like, again, this goes back to communication and really making sure that you guys are having those conversations of like what the business needs versus personal. And if you're going to be flexible with them, you also have to be very understanding of, okay, well then how flexible am I willing to be if they need some flexibility from me, right? So if they're being flexible for you, how willing are you to be flexible with them? And so I think that can get tricky because some people that I've coached who work with family and friends have felt that family kind of takes a little bit of advantage or friends take a little bit of advantage of the situation because they have that prior relationship. They're like, oh, so-and-so will understand. And that's something you do not want to have within the business. I think also with my business is so intertwined in my life. And obviously my personal and business kind of there's a lot of overlap, I guess I would say, because I work with family and friends and then obviously doing this and having this be such a big piece of my life. I think the other thing that I will say is that there's often a lot of them in your life, right? Like when you guys think about your family and how often you see them week to week, right? Like when you're someone who's working with family, they're in it. Like they are in your day to day every single day. So I do think the downside can be that if you do need space, like typically if you think about work, and you're a job that would not have family or friends in it, if you needed space from work, what would you do? You go and hang out with friends and family. Well, the thing that you have to be conscious of is that if you need space from work in your own business, then that space is typically not going to have that same feel that you might be used to, because the space that you're getting to go see your friends or family, they're also going to be talking about business. So like I would say there's a lot of intertwining of these different factors of your life. So in my opinion, I have found it hard to see like friends even because they do what I do. I found it difficult to go to family because we end up talking about business. I find it difficult sometimes to get space away from the business because it is so much a part of our life. Again, a lot of a part of our communication. Yeah. So the other thing that I will say as like the last, I guess, like con is that you guys, if you know my story, have kind of like known my family situation and all the ways that I was raised and things like that. And with my parents being divorced, something that I have struggled with is like considering that factor and basically what that has on a relationship. And so I was talking to somebody else who works with their husband in it. And they were basically saying that I worry because all of our eggs are in one basket. And basically, if it doesn't work out for her, it also impacts her partner and their joint livelihood together. So while I think it is beautiful, we also have to just be like really honest, right? About what the two sides of the conversation are. If you and your partner are going to work together, you have to be willing and acknowledge that you've got all your eggs in one basket. So if this business does work, you are both going to grow beautifully. And if your business doesn't work or your relationship doesn't work, what does that look like? And I think, again, the downside of having family in is that there is incredible reward, but there's also incredible risk associated with it. And so I think my whole looking at friends and family is making sure that you're just having those honest conversations, because I think it's not advised to go into this type of dynamic with only looking at like the wins for everybody. There needs to be honest conversations about what the risk is, whether it is with a romantic partner, a sibling, a mom, a friend, right? Like, what does that actual impact look like? If we win, what does it look like? And if we don't win, what does that look like? And making sure everyone's on board for that. So listen, I'm not going to tell you all the amazing things about working with family and then all the things you want to consider when it comes to resistance, and not tell you how we make this work. That's probably the top question I get is, okay, tell me your honest opinion. So now we know the pros, now we know the cons, but I often get asked like, okay, but how do you guys make this work? Like, what are the things that you guys do that actually allow this to function well? Because as I said, we have been working together for, I think at this point, it's probably about 2 years now. So I will say, here are some of the things that I would suggest to you if you were thinking about working with a partner, best friend, parent, sibling, cousin. Doesn't matter. If you're working with somebody you have a very intimate relationship with, a very close relationship with, these are some of the things that I would highly suggest to you. So first, I would say you need to have a clear understanding of your roles and expectations, like as specific in detail as possible, because you want to make it clear and outlined. This is what I need from you. They'll say, this is what I need from you in return. And there's none of this, like, it's up for discussion. I think because all of us understand this is your role, this is my role, and we've had those clear discussions about that, there's never this awkward middle gray area. I like to make it as black and white as possible, because then I already know there's gray because we're friends and family. So to me, when I'm working with friends and family, the core thing is you have to have super specific roles and expectations so that that is not something that ever becomes a negotiation or a gray area in your relationship. You need to practice being respectful. And I know that sounds like silly, but like the way that you phrase things to your partner or the way that you communicate, the tone you have, like I have to be conscious of that. The tone that I have in a conversation that is a non-business conversation probably shouldn't be the tone that I have when I'm trying to give feedback to somebody who, whether they are a family or not, is a team member, right? So you need to be conscious of the dynamic. For example, for me, I work with my mom, and obviously your parents are always like in your life, or most times like, hey, we're the authority. It's because this is what I want to do and this is what we suggest, and like we know best kind of thing. The difficult piece for us has been the fact that is the dynamic definitely in my personal life. Like I definitely look to her as an advisor in my personal life, and she's a great advisement within the business, incredible. But I would also say it's difficult because I still have the final say, whereas in my personal life growing up, obviously that wasn't the dynamic. So I think it's tricky when you're communicating to kind of, again, have that clear understanding of this is a professional conversation, this is a personal conversation. And as a result, you need to be conscious of the phrasing you use, the tone you use, the way you communicate should be different in those different settings because they require different types of communication. With this as well, you always want to be mindful of the balance of like that give and take. As I said before, my family goes above and beyond for our business. The times that they've been here till like 2 a.m. prepping for a shoot, that is not their hours. They do not have hours that work till 2 a.m. They're not night shift people. And the way that they've worked till 2 o'clock in the morning on things for me, and, you know, the way that they've been up at like 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock in the morning to go to shoots and stuff and do business stuff and just putting in like a lot of effort and hours, that's a lot of, you know, I'm taking a lot of that role that's not included in their traditional role. And so I think to me, I've also been conscious of like, how can I give as well? So like to me, I very much recognize that if someone's going to give to the business, you also need to give back, but you also want to do that within balance. And what I mean by that is like, it needs to be spoken expectation of that, which is like, hey, I recognize that you stayed super late the other day to work on this project with us. So as a result, if you do need tomorrow to recoup or basically get some time off, I understand because you put in those extra hours. Because at a normal job, if you are in overtime, you're in overtime. You got to go home. So if they've used overtime, you want to kind of know, okay, like let's be conscious. If they're giving a lot to the business, be conscious of not just taking that, but also what can you give back? Do they need an extra day off? If they're doing more for the business, are you doing more for them in return? And if you don't want to do more in return, then don't take from them doing more for you. Because I think that's where, again, that resentment kind of starts to get created. I do think there is this importance, in my opinion, that like when you have any team member, you need to reward really good behavior, right? Like if someone is getting incredible results, if someone's putting in the reps, if someone is doing the work, you need to acknowledge, hey, I see you. Thank you, and go above and beyond for that person. And so for me, when you have that, especially with friends and family, you'll recognize, as I said earlier, they're going to put in a lot of hours in this business. They're going to go above and beyond when it comes to what they do for your business or you guys intertwining together. And so it would be my hope and suggestion that if you see someone's going above and beyond for your business, like you would any team member, you should be going above and beyond to recognize that effort. Putting in the extra hours, recognize that. Putting in the extra effort to go above and beyond for something they've done as a project, recognize that. I think sometimes, again, because of it being so informal, that can kind of slide under the radar because like, oh, it's family kind of thing. It's, it's Sarah, it's Tom. Like I don't need to, no. You need to treat them the way you would treat a team member and acknowledge them in the same way that if they're putting in the reps, they're putting in the work, acknowledge that. I think something that can happen is because of the relationship, you're super informal and you're like, oh, they know. Yeah, it's kind of like saying my partner knows that I love them, but it never hurts to hear it. And so to me, that's the same thing with family. Like, yes, they know you appreciate them. They know that, you love them and they know that if they put in the reps, you appreciate it. But to me, the most important thing here is that you acknowledge it. And so I would say, don't let that fly under the radar. If someone's going above and beyond, make sure that they know that you see it. I would also say showing gratitude between you is kind of connected to that because I think oftentimes small things, you'd be shocked what small little efforts will do. Like even for us, like randomly sending like a Starbucks card to our team and randomly just doing things to be like, hey, thank you. And I think with family or with friends, if you're going to be so supportive of each other, recognize one another. And it doesn't have to be in a crazy way. Like if they're doing massive things, obviously this may mean a raise, it may mean additional compensation. Yes, but there's also just like the small little efforts of a thank you and a day off and a Starbucks card or whatever it is. Like small things go a long way to just be recognized. And this also goes back to knowing how your team is motivated because different people on your team are motivated different ways. So you want to be conscious of knowing how is your family motivated? Are they motivated by rest? Are they motivated by money? Are they motivated by gifts? Kind of like a love language. Like how are they motivated? And try to make sure that you're acknowledging those things like you would for any other team member. I do also think that you need to set aside non-business time. I often have found, again, like that over communication is good, but you also don't have a lot of boundaries then. So because of that, you need to be very communicating of like, hey, let's not talk business here. Even for me, I sometimes will literally like multiple times a week now vocalize to my family, hey, I'm actually deciding that I'm checking out of the business today at 6 p.m. So if they're going to work on something at 8 p.m., you can work on it, but I don't want to talk about business till tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. So like I will go and over communicate to basically say, hey, like I usually am very open for communication for the business, but I want to let you know, I don't want to talk about business after these hours. And it can even be like when you guys go to a family function, it can be when you go to brunch. I often will many times now vocalize to say, hey, you know what? Good question. To be honest though, can we talk about something else? Because I just feel like my whole day has been business. I don't really want to go into business anything until tomorrow, if that's okay. And I think having that, again, set expectation for me, even with like close friends that I work with, to say, hey, let's just hang out and chill. Let's like basically turn off our phones, turn off business today. And I think just setting that, because otherwise, again, it's a blurred gray area. You have to basically outline that as an expectation so that both parties understand what you guys need. And I do also think that with family, you guys can celebrate success together. I don't know how to explain it. But when I win, it's not me winning, it's us winning. When someone outlines notes, for example, for a podcast episode and gives me like scripted notes of things to consider, things to say. And then I record and I'm like, hey, this was a great episode. This really flowed. Thank you so much for everything that you just put into that episode. It was so great to record. It was so easy to record. The ideas really flowed. Thank you for that, right? Like, acknowledge, not you finish your podcast recording and you're like, oh, that was good. Awesome. You need to acknowledge this was a team effort. Like when I have a win for a launch, I was like, that was systems who helped. That was marketing who helped. That was finance who helped. Like, everybody had a role in this win. So I think it's important to acknowledge, regardless of family or friends, to be honest, but even with family and friends, to make sure it doesn't get missed. This is an us win. So even though you may be putting in a lot of work or you may be doing something in a certain area of the business, recognize that all of you guys are winning. All of you guys are growing. I think treating friends or family as equals. I think that sometimes because you know that your family is safe and because you know that there's somebody who's going to love you and support you regardless, sometimes if you're not careful, you can be condescending in the sense of being kind of short with people or like, oh, like they know kind of thing. The thing that I think is important is that you recognize that to make it work, you can't take advantage of the relationship. And what I mean by that is do not necessarily think that just because someone is family and because, oh, they'll understand, that you can be short or that you can be small in your communication or basically belittle the person because, oh yeah, like they understand I was joking. They understand that I was stressed. They understand whatever. Try to be conscious of the fact of how you communicate and that just because someone is safe to you and just because someone does understand doesn't mean they necessarily should be treated that way. And also what I will say, I think across team in general, but I think especially with friends or family, is to give people autonomy. I think for us, the way that we've been able to work so well is I don't really micromanage. I basically say, here's your expectations. Here's the standards of kind of how we want that done. Here's the flow and the process of how to understand how to do it, processes to do it. And then basically with all of that being considered, I check in on the progress of the milestones of that project. But I think you need to have confidence in your team and you need to have confidence in your family or friends. They got it. And so I think when someone will communicate to me, oh, I'm worried because my mom this, or I'm worried because my friend this, I'm like, I get it. But you also need to let them stand on their own 2 feet and really show their role within the business. And so to me, if you want to work with someone you have a very close relationship with, you need to be conscious of communication. You need to be conscious of the expectations that you guys have. You need to have very clear outlined roles. You need to make sure that you have time that is non-business between you. You need to celebrate them as much as they're celebrating you. You need to realize this is a team win. This is not a me win, right? This structure is so good. If I was to say, what's my vote, work with family or don't, I say do it. However, if you do it, you want to be conscious of how you do it. And so I think that's the biggest thing that I want you to take away from today is that if you are someone who either wants to get into your family's business, I talked to somebody, she was going to go into a business with her in-laws. And she said to me, Kate, give me the honest one-on-one of it. And I said, listen, it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be, there's no rule book for this, but the reality is there are best practices. It's going to be a different scenario than with a traditional team member, but it can be fantastic and beautiful if you want it to be. And so to me, if you are going to go into a dynamic working with a partner, boyfriend, sister, brother, parent, like cousin, whoever it is, take these practices and basically say, okay, I want to do this and I know that it's going to be great, but I also recognize that we're going to have resistance areas that are not going to be the same with other team members. And that's just simply because of this relationship that we have, which again is beautiful, but can also be something that provides resistance in working as well. So listen, after having worked with my family for some time now and close friends for some time now, this has been such an incredible journey. I highly recommend it. If you are somebody who's thinking about doing this, you should proceed into this with clear expectation, with a clear understanding, eyes wide open of what it's really going to look like. But if you can do that and you can have those tough conversations, you can have that clear expectation, I think you will be blown away by the experience. And it is something that I was very hesitant to do because in the online or even business space, it's considered to be like a no-no. But in doing so, it's probably one of the best decisions that I've made in my business. And that's just because of all the impact that it's had, not only on me, but on our team and on the business growth as well. So all that to be said, I hope you guys have an incredible rest of your day. And as always, stay ambitious.